Hello everybody, welcome back. In this video, we will be tackling this Eastlake dresser, but before we dive in, I just wanted to say a big thank you to those of you that have watched my Art Deco lane chest restoration. I can't thank y'all enough. The response has been truly overwhelming. Here is our project. This is an Eastlake dresser. Now, the Eastlake movement was a period from 1870 to 1890, so post-Victorian. The carvings were less ornate than the Victorian era, more geometric shapes, more shallow carvings, and this specific one is a side locking mechanism boarding chest. When the side panel is locked, the drawers will not slide open, and you can see it has its original key, so when you unlock it, the drawers are allowed to open. Now this has beautiful hand-cut dovetails, and it is made of solid mahogany, and I believe the burl inlays in the drawer are solid walnut burl. This is a beautiful piece. I've had it for several months and it's been eyeing me down in my garage. It has several critical flaws, which the structural components of this dresser are going to be the biggest challenge. You can see there's a very large crack going across the entire top, and there are cracks on both side panels. Structurally, it is not wobbly, but obviously these are unsightly and essentially render it unsellable. So my intent is to do an era correct restoration on this dresser. So I will not be sanding, I will not be using poly or hard wax oils. My intent is to gently strip it, fill the cracks, correct the top, and shellac. First order of business was to remove the batwing hardware. These will not be added later. I am trying to source some period appropriate hardware for this piece. Here's a better look at the drawers. You can see that there are front and back hand cut dovetails. You can also see that that drawer bottom is a really hefty piece of solid wood. Now, the insides of the drawers have been refinished at some point. They're in pretty good shape. Now, the center hole is the original hardware hole, so I'm assuming they were for drop pulls. I removed the hinges and proceeded to also remove the original locking mechanism. The lock is original to the piece. The mechanism of the lock itself was actually really cool, pretty intricate from something from the mid 1800s. So here's a better look at the underside of the top. Notice there is a screw attaching that added brace into the top. My next order of business was to try and remove the top, which proved to be a lot more difficult than I anticipated. Here is where we're at. Taking this top off took me 3 hours of hammering and gently chiseling, but I got it off. Um, there is some tear out that happened, which I'm not all that excited about. Here, here. But the reason the top had split was because this middle brace was added later. This is the only type of wood of this species in the entire dresser. So I think maybe the top came loose, and when they restored it, they added the brace. And the brace is fine because it was doweled in, but there was a screw coming up through the underside here. Let's see if I can. Right there. That was screwing the brace into the top. So with heat and humidity and then cold contraction expansion, the top had nowhere to basically move into. It was held in place. And that's why it split where it did and how it did. So now it is up to me to figure out how to glue these pieces together. I think I think I can do it. um, but then I need to see how it all is going to fit with some of these torn out pieces. I think I just need to go back in there and smooth everything out, but we'll see. I just need to get the top glued first. I think what I'm going to do with the side panel cracks is fill them. Fill them probably with glue and then add some wood filler on top just to blend them. Ultimately, when I refinish it, you won't be able to see them. What I thought was really cool is I got another clue as to when this was made. It's kind of hard to tell. There we go. Those are square nails, and square nails were used in 1830 to 1890. This is a very old piece, and I'm still freaking out about it, even though I feel like the worst is over. Next, I just used some wood glue and painter's tape to attach some of the pieces that came loose when I was working to take off the top. I guess I decided to procrastinate next because instead of focusing on gluing the top back together, I wanted to see what was underneath that dark finish. I used lacquer thinner and 3/0 steel wool to dissolve the existing finish, and underneath was some beautiful burl wood and solid mahogany spoon carvings. Next, I did turn my attention back to the top. I applied wood glue to both sides, laid them flat, and used some clamps to bring the two edges together. The back side of the top came together really well. The front side did leave a little bit of gap, especially in the middle portion of the crack. I did my best to clamp it, let the glue dry overnight, and I was pretty pleased with the results the next day. Definitely better. It still does need some wood filler and blending, color matching to make everything come together. I really like the Famo wood filler, but the can I had was pretty dried out. So I put a little bit of lacquer thinner in that jar top that you see there. Added some of the Famo wood, and I also had the Creative Colors powders from Mr. Cornwall's. They come from the Odie's company in the walnut color. I thought that that would add a little bit more red richness that the wood filler coloring was lacking. So I did my best to mix that all up, soften the wood filler as much as possible, and used my fingers to press it into the crack. Fama wood dries really fast, so by the time I made my way across the crack, it had already dried and I could go back and start pulling back the existing finish. Since the top was unfinished, I used a little bit of water to help me better color match to the surrounding area. I used my wood touch-up paints, blend all sticks, graining markers, and did the best I could. This was the initial pass. I did end up layering more colors and grain into it as the shellac layers were applied. After color matching, I went ahead and started stripping the rest of the dresser using the same method that I stripped the top with, using some lacquer thinner and 2-aught to strip back as much of the old dark finish as I possibly could. You can see here the before and after, before, of course, being on top. That burl wood inlay was so beautiful. And here's what all the drawers looked like when the stripping was completed. And then I moved on to stripping the body of the dresser. After stripping the body of the dresser, it was finally time to address these side panel cracks. On this one side, I basically taped out the crack and used wood glue to inject into the space. What was interesting about this, I did have a piece of tape on the underside of the crack, but I just kept injecting wood glue again and again and again, and it would just disappear. It never leaked to the inside of the dresser. I actually don't know where all of that wood glue ended up. So finally, after I filled it as much as possible, I called it good, moved on to the second panel crack, which was much smaller. As I was waiting for the glue to dry, I picked up a can of de-waxed shellac. This is the Seal Coat by Zinsser. And I started lightly applying my first coat to the side panels. The shellac really started to make the burl wood grain really pop. Now, before this project, I had used shellac just to seal some drawers, but never on a full project like this. I like it. It dries really fast. It does dry with a fairly glossy sheen. So you're going to see later in the video how I deal with taking that back to a satin. But this is after a first coat. And the reason I decided to finish the piece with shellac is because I was really trying to do a true restoration and stay true to the methods that were initially used on the piece. So after the side panel was done, I continued on applying the shellac to the drawer fronts. If you've made it this far in the video, please go ahead and hit the like, subscribe button. It means a lot to a small growing channel like mine. Here you can see what a clear difference the shellac application makes to the look of the wood. It definitely gives it some vibrance and depth. I was really pleased. Then I proceeded with my first coat of shellac on the top. You can still see the crack here, but hopefully as I apply the layers of shellac and continue to add color matching, it blends even better. Once all of the glue injected into the crack had finally hardened, I picked up this wood putty by Minwax in the color red mahogany. This was a product that I had never used before. I used my 5-in-1 tool to press as much as I could into the crack. As I worked my way down the crack, I thought to myself, wow, the texture on this is perfect. I can really start to press it in there. It doesn't have a gritty feel to it, so this is going to work perfect. So after I had filled both cracks, I noticed that on the package it says easy to use, never hardens. So I went back, scraped off as much as I could, but I don't really understand why this product exists on the market. So comment down below if you know why. After the putty was removed, I went through and color matched the crack to the rest of the surroundings. Since the putty itself was red mahogany, this was pretty easy for this side. I then proceeded to apply my first coat of shellac to the side panels, and this was what it looked like after just one pass. Now, up until this point, I had been using a synthetic bristle 2-inch ankle brush to apply the shellac and a small little circular mop brush for the details. But I was reading online that you want to apply thin coats of shellac repeatedly in order to build up the finish and the luster. The best way to do this is using something called either a mop or a rubber, which is really easy to make. You just take a wad of cotton balls, a lint-free rag, like a little t-shirt rag, and then you just wrap it, secure it with a rubber band, and make sure there's no wrinkles along the front surface of the pad. And the correct way to do this, not the way I did, was to essentially squirt the shellac from the top into the mop. The way I was doing it was just easiest for me. I was dipping the mop into the shellac and making my passes like you can see here. This worked really well. It was actually a lot easier to apply the shellac in an even form without it ending up streaky. I ended up doing about 20 passes of shellac on the top. I really enjoyed working with shellac, but the one downside is it does leave a high gloss finish. So there are a few ways that you can rub it back into a satin finish, and one of those ways is using some fine steel wool and just basically rubbing with the grain until you scuff it up. Other ways, you could use sandpaper and wet sand. So I had to do this for the entire dresser, and I ended up doing it a few different times just to get the sheen down enough to where it didn't look as glossy. Afterwards, finally, the moment had come for me to attempt to put the top back onto the dresser. I applied some wood glue liberally to both surfaces, the top of the dresser and the underside of the top, and just used a tongue depressor to spread that out as evenly as I could. Aside from having to take the top off, this is the step that I was dreading the most because if you remember, I did have some tear out spots from the top removal. So I was procrastinating this a while. After I had applied the hide glue, I started fitting the top back onto the dresser. This did take a while. This process did not go smoothly. Self-doubt and frustration definitely kicked in, but I did get it. It was not perfect. Okay, so here's the top. I had clamped it and I had put big bottles, packs of water on it. So I removed the clamps and now I'm dealing with this. Um, I guess I'm refinishing this top again. Aside from that, the top glued okay, but I am gonna just need to work on this some more. Luckily, this isn't a rush project. I still need to order handles, and I'm waiting for my square nails to come in from eBay so I can repair the drawers. But here we are. Now, in retrospect, everything did happen for a reason here. After I stripped back the initial finish on the top, it allowed me to better get into some of these cracks that were still pretty obvious between the top and the rest of the dresser. So, what I decided to do is apply some of the original Famo wood putty and really press it into the cracks. I then used some sandpaper with some detailing tools to sand back as much of it as I possibly can, and then proceeded to color match the seam. I started with some of my blend all sticks in the color mahogany, I believe. Just use that to run it along the edges that I could at least get into. After I used my furniture touch-up paints and a fine detail brush to get in the crevices as much as I could. Now I know it still looks rough here, but remember this is without any shellac on it. So of course my next step was to start the refinishing process with the shellac on the top and the seam all over again. It was at this point that I started to feel that maybe, just maybe, I could pull this off. Again, over the course of the next several days, I ended up applying about 25 layers of shellac to the top. Next, I turned my attention to the brass hardware. I let that soak overnight in some CLR and just used some fine steel wool to brush it as clean as I possibly could. The original hardware did end up polishing up nicely. I reassembled the side panel and attached the hinges and lock, and then turned my attention to the drawers. The drawers were in good shape, but they needed a light cleaning, and some of the drawer bottoms were loose, so I had to reattach those, in addition to some cracks that had occurred through the dovetails. The original nails in these drawers were square nails, and since I was attempting to be as period appropriate as I possibly could, I did order some square nails off of eBay and use those to fasten the drawers. As far as the cracks go, it's simple fix. I shoved some glue in there, clamped those down, and they repaired up nicely. If you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking it out. We are nearing the end. This is the hardware that I ended up ordering from Kennedy Hardware. This is, again, period appropriate East Lake hardware. It is brass, but it was too shiny. So I ordered some brass azier to try to give it some patina. So I always try to incorporate new products to me that I've never had to use before, and brass azier was one of them. I was really surprised at how easy this was. The pieces did age very quickly. It took them about 30 seconds. And essentially, what you do, you pull them out of the brass ager, you run them under water, and you can scrub some of the ager off if they're too tarnished to give them that aged look. So let's take a look back at what we started with. This piece was in good condition except for those cracks. So the mission here was repair the cracks and camouflage them as much as possible. And here's the final product. I'm pleased with how this came out. This was my first attempt at restoration. I try to stay as true to the methods that were used to create the piece initially. And I'm sure I made mistakes along the way, and there are probably better ways to do the corrections that I did, but I am really proud of myself for attempting this piece. What would you have done differently? I know there are some master restorers out there that I know I could learn from. Always open to constructive advice and constructive criticism. Also, I know this video was longer than the others I have done, so let me know if you prefer the longer videos or if you'd like just short and sweet snippets. Since this was a restoration, I wanted to go in a little bit more detail. Thank you all for watching. If you haven't already subscribed, please go ahead and do that. It helps me out a lot. See y'all next time.